back to ARC Tutorials. This is Testing Concept Series. In today's episode, we are going to learn about integration testing. What is integration testing? What are some of the tools? What are some of the advantages and what are some of the disadvantages? I hope at the end of this tutorial, your concept about integration testing will be much clear. Let's get started. This is part 16 of the testing concept series. This is the entire playlist in front of you. Please go through all the concepts so that you can learn all the testing concepts clearly and you have your continuity in your learning. Today we are in episode number 16. We are learning about integration testing. Alright, so what is integration testing? Integration testing is a type of software testing that involves testing the integration between different components, units of a software application. That's very vague and generic statement, but if you have to explain, you can always say that integration testing means involving testing different systems, different services, or different components or different services in a software application. Right now, when we talk about integration, we are talking about different applications, different frameworks, different microservices, etc. You can also think of it like a process layer, right? You have your front end, you have your back end. Your back end is talking to some other database layer or a cloud architecture of a database. It's talking to some other SaaS system or some other services, etc. Testing all these systems together to make sure that the data is flowing from one system to another system smoothly without any issues, also in a more secured way, also in a more stable way. You have to make sure that when you are when you're performing integration testing, you handle all the negative use cases. It's okay to say one thing, that both the systems are working fine because data is flowing correctly. But what happens when you try to pass wrong data to each system? That is where the criticality of integration testing comes into picture. Alright, so now let's talk about some of the integration testing tools, right? So test automation tools, obviously we know there is Selenium, APM, Ranox, you have JUnit, NUnit, XUnit, Mocha, Jasmine, Zest. All of those are test automation tools that we use to make sure that our testing is complete. There are also test management tools that we have to use. For example, TestRail, Zypler, TestLink, etc. In most cases, since we are talking about integration testing, we are integrating multiple systems, and that's where the automation build testing and deploying happens. That's called continuous integration tools. We can use something called Jenkins, we can use TeamCity, Travis CI, Bitbucket, etc. to perform the continuous integration testing. We also have static code analysis tools. Now these are the tools that tells us linting, syntax error, security vulnerability, etc. Those tools include SonarQube, Veracode, checkmarks, etc. To manage, to document, to share knowledge, to communicate, we use different tools like Slack, Trello, Jira, Confluence. Those are the collaboration and communication tools. When you are a part of a team which does integration testing, you have to work with one or more of these systems in order to complete the end-to-end cycle, right? You might also use some dedicated applications for API testing like Postman, Kotlin Studio, etc. Again, the list goes on, differs from requirement to requirement, but overall, these are the top level tools that you will end up using. Alright, now let's talk about some of the advantages, right? Now, there is no doubt, because these will remain more or less same for a lot of testing concepts, that it improves the software quality, right? Obviously, when you're talking about integration or a process layer, you need to make sure that you identify and fix any issues or defects before you deploy the build. So that's improving the software quality. Second, reducing the risk of errors. It gives a bad experience when some system is down and your other front end is not able to handle. So those are the things that you have to make sure that you test thoroughly so that you reduce the risk of errors, right? If you're processing a payment, you don't want certain third party system to be down when you're accepting the payment, right? So those are the end-to-end system scenarios, happy path, negative path, all of that you have to test so that you can reduce the risk of errors. Obviously, once you start seeing that all the happy path, negative path are working, your software and application is performing well, all your tests are passing, your integration scripts are in place, it increases the confidence in the build in the team. Better documentation. When you're working with multiple systems, we have a lot of stories, we have user stories which cover them, which provides us base for our QA teams to automate, to do manual testing, and hence results in a better documentation. Also, the documentation helps as an audit trail in future reference or maintaining the software over a period of time. You can always go back and refer to those user stories as to why something was done in certain way, and that is your audit log for user stories. Now let's talk about some of the disadvantages, right? So first and foremost, when you have multiple systems in place, a lot of APIs, not all use cases can be thoroughly tested. That's number one. It takes a lot of time and effort. Um, and every team will say that my code is working, our functionality is working well. It's the problem is in the integration. Now I don't know if you have heard this line before, that it works in my local, right? And that's where things go messy. Fragile tests. Integration test involves continuous integration because there is a lot of code changes happening. There is security related things, there is performance related, there is compatibility issues. So the test becomes a little fragile. You need to keep updating them frequently in order to keep them up to date. Limited coverage. When you are testing data from front end to back end, your coverage is limited. You don't know what's the performance at the database layer, you don't know what's the performance at the microservice level, etc. So that kind of limits it to the limited coverage. False positives, that's again a lot of times we all have seen when two units always indicate they're working, but when something goes wrong, let's say server is down, a negative use case, server down, errored out, timeout errors, etc. Those can lead to a lot of issues in real time. So our integration testing cannot really cover all the 100% use cases or possibilities of permutation and combination of use cases. So that's one of few of the disadvantages of integration testing. All right, so that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope your concept is clear now about integration testing, why it plays an important role. You will be able to explain, you will be able to defend your arguments with the data that I've provided in the tutorial. Now you also know about some of the tools that are used for integration testing. So next time when your application requires one, I hope you will be able to refer to this and suggest them some of the tools. Thank you so much for joining. In the next episode, we will learn about behavior driven development testing, extremely critical, especially when you're working in Scrum, Agile, Kanban kind of an environment, dynamic setup where requirements are frequently changing. That's where BDD comes into picture. We will learn all about it in the next episode. If you like my work and tutorials, please consider buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/arctutorials. Thank you so much for joining in this episode. See you in the next episode.